She was nobody, a busboy in a borrowed uniform, invisible to the world. But in 3 seconds, she threw her body over a stranger's child as glass rained down like knives. She didn't know whose son he was. She didn't know that one act of pure instinct would rip her out of her quiet, forgotten life and drop her straight into the most dangerous world in the city. Now the most feared man alive says she belongs to him. And the terrifying part, she's starting to wonder if he's right. Welcome to our channel, where we explore the raw, complicated world of mafia bosses, the unexpected bonds between broken people, and the kind of love that costs everything. This story reminds us that real courage isn't planned. It lives in the split second when everything is on the line and you move anyway. If that kind of story moves you, hit like, drop a comment telling us what you would have done in her place. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe because we have so many more stories just like this one waiting for you.
But Elena moved. She didn't even hesitate. The water pitcher crashed to the floor as she lunged, covering the distance in 3 quick steps. I saw her throw her body over the boy, making herself a shield. She wrapped herself around him, tucking his head into her chest, her back to the falling glass. I heard the first one shatter against her shoulder. The sound was sick. Then another, and another. I could see the dark spots of champagne spreading across her white shirt, and then the darker red mixing in. It was her blood. The boy was screaming under her, a muffled, terrified sound. She just held on tighter, taking every single hit for him. And then it was over. The restaurant was a mess of noise, people shouting, chairs scraping back, but the sound of breaking glass was gone. Elena was still hunched over the boy, shaking. I felt sick with my own cowardice. A voice cut through the noise, quiet and deadly. "Don't move." It was him, Dante Moretti. He was kneeling beside her. "Matteo, are you hurt?" The little boy, Matteo, whimpered but said no. I saw Moretti's hands on Elena's shoulders, so careful, trying not to touch the places where the glass stuck out. "Look at me," he ordered her. My heart was pounding in my ears. I wanted to run, to disappear, but I couldn't look away. I saw her lift her head. And the man, Dante Moretti, he was something else. He looked like a movie star, but a dangerous one, with a jaw that looked like it was cut from stone and eyes that saw everything. He had this thin scar slicing through his eyebrow. Even with all the chaos, his suit was perfect. But his eyes weren't cold like I expected. They were on fire, locked on Elena, and in that moment, she wasn't invisible anymore. He saw her, and it looked terrifying. "You're hurt," he stated, and his gaze dropped to the glass sticking out of her shoulder. I saw his whole face harden. The rage that flashed in his eyes was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. "I'm fine," she whispered, a total lie. Is Matteo?" "You knew his name," Moretti said, his voice low, suspicious. "How did you know his name?" "I heard you," she stammered. "I just heard you say it." She looked like she was about to fall apart. The kid, Matteo, wiggled free and reached for her face, so gentle. "Papa, she saved me," he said. "The glass was gonna get me, but she jumped." Moretti didn't move a muscle, but I could feel the tension coming off him from 10 feet away. The whole room was holding its breath. Sophie was sobbing somewhere in the background. Marcus finally showed up with a first aid kit but just stood there, too scared to get close without being invited, close to the man whose kid Elena had just saved. "What's your name?" Moretti asked her. And it wasn't really a question. "Elena," she breathed. "Elena Santos." He said her name back to her, slow, like he was memorizing it, owning it. "I am Dante Moretti." A wave of murmurs went through the staff and the few diners who knew what that name meant. I knew. My uncle used to tell me stories. The Morettis ran things you didn't talk about in the light of day. My gut twisted. Elena had just saved the son of the most feared man in the city. I should clean up, she mumbled, trying to get away, but his hand kept her there. You need a hospital, he said. Then he looked at one of his guys. Marco, call Dr. Russo, have him meet us at the estate, and find out who is responsible for this. He waved a hand at the mess, at poor Sophie. It was an accident, I wanted to scream, but the words were stuck in my throat. He said the word accident, like he didn't believe in them. Sir, really, I can just go to the ER, Elena insisted. But it was useless. Dante Moretti stood up, and he seemed to fill the entire room. You saved my son, he said, and his voice was quiet, but everyone heard it. You put yourself in the way for a child you do not know. Whatever life you had before this moment, it's changed. He looked right into her eyes. Now, Elena Santos, I pay my debts. And this debt, I will spend as long as necessary to repay. It wasn't a thank you. It was a cage. I watched them lead her away, and I finally found my feet. I walked over to where Sophie was crying, her whole body shaking. I saw it, I whispered, my voice hoarse. I saw your heel catch the rug. It was an accident. I'll tell them. I'll tell them what I saw. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I remember the glint of light, not on some fancy watch, but on the cheap rim of a water glass. That was the start of it all. I saw the man at table 9 watching the Morettis, and a cold dread washed over me. I should have flagged the manager, mentioned the guy's weird intensity. Instead, I kept my head down, polishing silverware like my life depended on it, and in doing so, I let the threshold be crossed for her. It was my silence that threw her into his world, my fear that locked the door behind her. I stood there, holding a polished fork, and did nothing while her world shattered like the glass that was about to fly. I was still standing there when they left, my feet glued to the floor. I watched him help her into the car, his man Matteo clutching her torn uniform like a safety blanket. Dante's other men took over the restaurant. Marco, the quiet one, cornered our manager, his voice a low threat that made Mr. Aurelio turn pale. The other one, Luca, was already on his phone, spitting rapid Italian. I only picked up a few words. La ragazza. Il bambino. The girl. The boy. The heavy silence in the car they left in was nothing compared to the roaring silence of my own cowardice. My whole body shook with it. She was brave. That's the thought that kept hitting me over and over. She didn't have to be. She could have ducked like I did. She could have saved herself. But she saw that little boy and didn't think twice. She was like a hero from one of his books. And me? What was I? I was just a waiter. A waiter who hid when things got loud, whose only instinct was self-preservation. The shame of that choice felt like a physical weight, crushing me long after they were gone, and I suspected it would be something I'd have to pay for a very long time. My silence was a filter, hiding the raw truth of what I saw. He's a child. That was her reason. It should have been mine, too. It should have been everyone's. But we all looked away, told ourselves it wasn't our problem. I saw the flicker of surprise in Dante Moretti's own eyes when she said it. Like he couldn't believe someone could be so simply, straightforwardly decent. The trap wasn't in his question to her. The trap was the one I'd set for myself years ago, the one where I decided looking the other way was a survival skill. It was irrelevant, he would have said. And he'd be right. Her life, as she knew it, was already over. Her rent was paid, yes, but what was the cost? Her manager told us she was on an indefinite leave of absence with full pay. We all knew what that meant. She wasn't fired, she was claimed. She took glass meant for his son, and in return, he took the rest of her life. He called it protection, but from where I stood, watching them clear out her locker the next day, it looked an awful lot like a cage. Her armor had been her anonymity, the fact that she was just another face in the city. And now it was gone. In the restaurant, we stopped saying her name. It felt too dangerous. By morning, everyone who mattered would know about the waitress who saved Matteo Moretti. I knew this would make her a target, I heard the whispers among the staff, the fear. He couldn't give her back her old life, her invisibility. All he could offer was his protection. The question wasn't whether she was smart enough to accept it. It was whether any of us were brave enough to deserve her sacrifice. The next morning, I woke up in my own apartment, worried about my own bills, my own small life. But the only thing I could picture was the blood on the marble floor. They had it scrubbed clean by the time my shift started, but I could still see the stain. I was in a prison of my own making, haunted by the memory of doing nothing. Dante Moretti thought he owed her everything, that he had to pay his debt. But I knew the truth. We all owed her. We all saw, and we all stayed quiet. I could walk away, I told myself. Just keep my head down, keep serving pasta to people who had no idea what had happened on that very spot. I saw Ani, the hostess, cross Elena's name off the schedule with a sigh. Just like that, she was gone, erased, and we were all accomplices to her disappearance. But the thought of her, trapped in some gilded guest room, paying for our collective cowardice, it was a poison I couldn't swallow. I couldn't live in the shadows of my own fear anymore. What I needed was to do something. Anything. I kept seeing the man from table 9, the one who had been watching them. He was a ghost in my memory, except for one detail I couldn't shake. As I'd refilled his water, I'd seen a tattoo on his wrist when his sleeve slid back. It was a coiled snake. That's what I had. Not a weapon, not a plan, just a drawing in my mind. While a doctor was pulling glass from her back, all I had was a tiny, useless detail that felt like it would get me killed if I ever spoke it aloud. 15 lacerations. I overheard Marco telling the manager she would have scars, a permanent reminder of her courage and my fear. Dante would ensure they were minimal, hire the best specialists, but they'd be there. My silence wouldn't leave a visible mark, but I could feel it scarring me on the inside. This will hurt, the doctor must have told her. And I knew what I had to do next would hurt too. It would be terrifying. But I gripped the edge of the clean, empty table 9 and decided I was ready for the pain. I couldn't look her in the eyes. I couldn't offer comfort as a doctor worked. But I could do one thing. I went to the back office, took a piece of paper, and drew the coiled snake tattoo from memory. Under it, I wrote the date, the time, and table 9. I didn't sign it. That night, I mailed the note to a crime reporter I'd read about, one known for digging into the city's dark corners. It was a small, cowardly act, an anonymous whisper against a storm. But it wasn't silence. And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. It started with the sound of a glass shattering, a memory that still cuts me. I remember the exact moment I froze, tray in hand, watching shards rain down. I wanted to be invisible, to melt into the background as fear coiled in my gut. But Elena, she was different. She didn't hesitate. She moved. I stood there, useless, wanting to matter but terrified of the cost. I see now that we all want to be seen. We just choose different ways. He built an empire on fear. She saved a child with pure instinct. I wonder which one of them truly understands what it means to be brave. It was never a question for her. And for him? For the first time, I think he was seeing someone real, not a pawn or a name. He was seeing Elena, and in her, maybe he saw something he'd lost in himself. A piece of a world he'd long since left behind. And then it was over. He scooped her up like she weighed nothing, his face a mask of cold fury. The doctor, Russo, was there in minutes, his bag ready. I remember the hushed orders, the way everyone scurried away from Mr. Moretti, afraid to even breathe in his direction. He told the doctor she wouldn't be going anywhere, and a chill went through me. It wasn't a promise of care. It was a declaration of ownership. The room emptied out, leaving a stain on the floor and a silence so heavy it felt like a shroud. I was left standing. I remember the sound first, the way glass shatters in a busy restaurant, silencing everything for a heartbeat. I was across the room polishing silverware when it happened. I saw him, the man with eyes that missed nothing. And then I saw Elena move, not with a thought, but like an instinct. She just launched herself forward. I watched his hand move to her collar, slow and possessive, and I remember thinking I should do something, say something, but I was frozen. Why did you get involved, I thought, watching her whisper to him. Why did you have to be the hero? His closeness to her felt like a threat, a claim being staked right in front of us. He spoke, and though I couldn't hear the words, I saw the finality in his face. He saw her, in a way none of us ever had. I saw the fear in her eyes, the desperate need for him to see she wasn't part of his world. A world of rules I couldn't imagine. But he just touched her face, so gently it was terrifying. I should have walked over. I should have said, "Hey, are you okay?" But I was a coward. I just watched him promise her safety, and even from 50 feet away, I knew that word meant something different coming from him. As he led her out, a piece of me knew our world, our dingy, invisible world, had just lost her for good. I saw the door close behind them and felt a chill, wondering if safety was just a prettier word for a cage, and I hated myself for not screaming. The next day, the silence where her laugh should have been was deafening. Every breath I took that next morning felt heavy with guilt. The talk in the kitchen was a low buzz of speculation and fear. Marcus, our boss, was just angry about being short-staffed. He didn't see a person was gone, he saw a hole in the schedule. I saw the spot on the floor where she'd fallen, even though it was scrubbed clean. The memory was a stain only I could see. The dark-eyed man had taken her, and I, who had worked beside her for a year, had just let it happen. The clock on the wall ticked past her start time, 10:47 a.m. A permanent reminder of my inaction. My own tips felt like blood money. No more Elena. No more quiet smiles. No more normal. I heard a plate drop and flinched. The ghost of her was everywhere. It got easier to ignore the empty space she left, but her absence still sat in the corner of my eye. Agnes, the severe-looking woman who had been with him that night, never came back. No one did. It was like they had erased the entire evening. Sometimes I'd look at the new waitresses, all fresh-faced and unaware, and feel a surge of anger. Did they know this place was haunted? I'd imagine Elena in a mansion somewhere, dressed in clothes she never asked for, clothes bought to own her, to replace the uniform of the life she'd left behind. Was she happy? Was she even alive? The questions were a poison I drank every single day. Mr. Moretti is very efficient, I could almost hear a voice say, and the thought made me sick with dread. Weeks turned into a month. I kept to myself, head down, taking orders. But at night, I couldn't escape it. I'd stare at my ceiling, replaying the moment she jumped, the crunch of the glass, the way he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. I let them take her. The thought was a constant refrain. I should have yelled, caused a scene, something. Consequences be damned. But his face would flash in my mind, the cold promise in his eyes, and I knew why I'd stayed quiet. The people who wanted to hurt his son, they wouldn't think twice about a nobody waitress who saw too much. Being invisible had always been my protection. But now my invisibility just felt like a stain, a mark of cowardice. Maybe that's what was wrong with me. I wanted to be brave like she was, but fear was a stronger master. I'd carefully put on my own uniform each morning, the cheap fabric a constant reminder of the world she'd escaped, and I was still trapped in. One day, I saw his face in a newspaper someone left behind. Dante Moretti, philanthropist, investor, predator. I found myself wandering the aisles of the grocery store, looking for her face in the crowds, hoping I'd see her looking lost, and I could finally say something. But there was nothing. Just the double doors of my memory, and him, standing in his study, a king in his castle. His power was in the air that night, thick like the smell of expensive cigars. I knew instinctively that men like him didn't ask, they took. And when he looked at Elena, it wasn't with kindness. It was with the shock of discovery, like finding a diamond in a dustbin. "How are you feeling?" I imagined him asking her, his voice a silken trap. He would study her, catalog her, learn her worth to him. I'd lowered myself into a booth after my shift, my back aching, and imagined her in a plush leather chair, a prisoner of a debt she never meant to incur. It wasn't an accident. The phrase echoed in my mind. She hadn't just been in the wrong place, she'd been in the right one for him. It wasn't an accident. I couldn't shake the idea. That poor girl Sophie who dropped the tray. I remembered the panic on her face. Had they gotten to her too? My world suddenly felt thin, breakable. I saw shadows everywhere. People in the restaurant weren't just customers anymore. They were threats. Every time a man looked at me too long, my blood ran cold. He had enemies, rivals, and Elena, my friend Elena, was now standing right in the middle of his war, simply because she had a good heart, a heart that beat for a child that wasn't hers. I saw how he looked at her, and it wasn't just about a debt, it was about possession. I couldn't live with the silence anymore. My inaction was a sickness. One night, after a long shift, I sat in my car, the key in the ignition, unable to move. I thought about Sophie, her fear for her own child. And I thought about Elena, who had acted to save another's. And then there was me, who had done nothing. My hands were shaking, but I pulled out my phone. It was a small act. A stupid one, maybe. A whisper against a hurricane. But it was something. I was going to make sure someone knew she was there, that someone from our world was still looking for her. I remember that first morning. He was so gentle with her, a softness I hadn't seen in years. That's his most dangerous weapon, I thought, her goodness against his cruel world. It makes her a wild card. It makes her priceless. The way he looked at her, like an object to be owned, made my stomach turn. I heard her ask what she was. A prisoner? A protected witness? She was trying to find her place in his world. He just said her name was to be Dante, and that she could be whatever she wanted, but she'd be it under his roof until the trouble passed. How long? She asked. His smile was a blade. As long as it takes. A knock came before she could argue. Marco walked right in, his face a mask of stone. Boss, there's trouble. The Calabresi family wants to talk. It's about what happened. The change in him was instant, a ripple of ice spreading through the room. The tender man who fixed her shirt vanished, replaced by the Don, a figure of pure, cold malice. His voice could have turned fire to frost that night. A neutral spot. They swear they're clean. They want a truce before things get worse. How convenient, he said, his movements sharp as he put on his suit coat. Tell them the warehouse at 8. All the usual arrangements. His eyes found her again, and arranged double the guards here. Nobody gets within 100 yards of Elena or Matteo, no exceptions. Marco paused, glancing at her. Boss, should we take her somewhere safe? If the Calabreses know she's here. They don't, Dante cut in. Not for now. I'm keeping it that way. She stays right here, where I know I can protect her. After Marco was gone, the air between them was heavy with unspoken words. I polished a table nearby, trying to be invisible. You're meeting the men who may have hurt your son, she said. I'm meeting men who need me to think they didn't, he corrected. If it's the truth or just another setup, we're about to find out. He walked around his desk, and she had to look up to meet his gaze. Stay inside today. Matteo keeps asking for you. Maybe you could spend some time with him. Agnesa can take you to his playroom. It was an order disguised as a suggestion, and she agreed. And when you're gone tonight? She asked. Tonight, you'll be locked down tight in a house safer than any president's, and you will trust that I handle my business. He reached for her, his touch on her jaw so soft it was painful to watch. Won't allow anything to hurt you, Elena. You saved my boy. That makes you my responsibility. Mine. The word hung in the air, a promise and a cage, and I saw she was caught, unable to turn away from him. I'm not yours, she whispered. but her voice wavered with doubt. Not yet, he agreed, his thumb brushing her lip with agonizing slowness. But you will be, Elena Santos. From the second you shielded Mateo, you belong to me. The only thing left is for you to stop fighting it. Then he was gone. He left her standing alone in that study, with just the scent of him and his words wrapping around her like iron chains, stealing her air and her will. Mateo found her an hour later in the playroom, that giant room overflowing with toys. He ran to her with that pure joy only a 5-year-old has, and she hugged him, being gentle with her sore back. "You're still here," he cried, his little hands on her face. "Papa said you would stay with us. Will you stay forever? Will you read a book to me? Do you know about dragons? I have 17 of them. Want to see?" His innocent happiness was like a light against the shadows of that house, and I saw her give a real smile for the first time. "Show me all of them," she said, letting him pull her toward his treasures. They spent the whole afternoon with building blocks and toy soldiers, lost in a world of make-believe. Matteo never stopped talking about his school, his friends, his grandmother in Italy who sends him cookies that taste like love. He asked about her own life with a child's simple curiosity, and I heard how she carefully rephrased her lonely life into a story fit for a little boy's ears. "Do you have a mommy?" he asked, and I saw the question land like a physical blow. "No, my love. My mommy passed away when I was little." "Me too," he said quietly. "My mommy is in heaven. Papa doesn't talk about her. It makes him sad." He leaned into her, avoiding her bandages. "But you're here now. Maybe you can be a mommy for a little bit." Her throat seemed to close up. "Oh, Matteo, I'm just here for a short time. Papa says you'll be here as long as necessary," he said with perfect kid logic. "And I need you to stay forever, 'cause you saved me, and you're very nice and you smell like cookies, even though Agnesa says you haven't baked anything, which is strange, but I still like it." She hugged him close, this poor, innocent child stuck in this dangerous life for no reason. I finally understood why Mr. Moretti would destroy the world for him, and why she had thrown herself in front of that glass. Some people just need protecting. Matteo was one of them. The only question was whether she would get out of the Moretti family's orbit before it consumed her entirely, or if she'd be another casualty. As Matteo slept on her shoulder, holding his dragon, I saw her look out the playroom window. The grounds were perfect, pristine, and crawling with armed men in designer suits. It was a beautiful prison. But God forgive me. I saw the look on her face and wasn't sure she even wanted to escape anymore. The night settled over the estate, tense and silent. She'd put Matteo to sleep an hour ago, reading story after story until his eyes finally shut, his little fist still wrapped around her finger. I had gently led her out, promising I would watch over him, my old heart aching for the boy. Now she was at her window, watching as Mr. Moretti's cars prepared to depart. I could spot him from the hallway. He stood taller than the rest, with the lethal grace of a true predator. He was dressed entirely in black, making him seem like a shadow brought to life. As if he felt her watching, he turned his head and looked right up. Their eyes connected across the lawn and through the glass, and I swear you could feel the energy shift in the house. He lifted a hand, not waving, just acknowledging her. A silent vow. "I will return." And then he was gone, disappearing into a black SUV, leaving her with a pounding heart and the terrible knowledge that this night would change everything. I watched her try to stay busy, wandering the parts of the house she was allowed, always under the silent watch of security cameras and guards. She ended up in the library, all those windows looking out onto the softly lit gardens, walls of books in languages from all over the world. She picked out a book of poems, the spine worn from use, and was just sinking into a chair when her phone rang. Her own cheap, cracked phone, still somehow working in this steel fortress. An unknown number. I saw her hesitate, her thumb over the ignore button, but something made her pick it up. "Hello?" I heard only her side. Silence, then her asking, "Who is this?" Her voice was shaky. "The girl who thinks she's a hero." The reply must have been distorted, terrifying. "You should have stayed out of it, little waitress. Now you're a problem." I saw the blood drain from her face. "I don't know what you mean. You shielded Dante Moretti's illegitimate son. So brave. So foolish." A pause. "Did he mention what we do with problems in our world?" "They vanish, Elena Santos. They just stop existing. And all of Moretti's guards can't save you when you're more trouble than you're worth." The call ended. She just sat there, frozen. The phone shook in her hand, the love poems completely forgotten. They knew who she was. They had her number. They could get to her even here, inside Dante's safe house, past all his men and all his promises. "I won't let anything happen to you." But he couldn't stop a threat he didn't even know existed. The library door flew open and she jumped, letting out a small scream before she saw it was Marco, his face grim. "Miss Santos, you need to come with me. Immediately." "What happened? Is it Mateo?" "The boy's safe. We have a problem. Let's go." His hand rested on his weapon, and suddenly the danger was very real. He led her down hallways I barely used myself, downstairs that went deep into the ground. The fancy decor gave way to concrete and steel. A safe room, I knew it. A bunker. The room was a command post, filled with screens showing every angle of the house, radios crackling. 3 other men were there, guns out and ready. As Marco hurried her to the center of the room, her phone slipped from her hand and fell, unseen, by the chair. I remember the first day I saw her. She didn't belong here. I was watching the cameras when Marco brought her in, looking so out of place among us soldiers. Then tonight, the alarms blared. I saw Marco block her path on the monitor, his body a shield. "What's going on?" Her voice was faint over the room's mic, tight with a fear I recognized. "Where is Dante?" Marco's reply was clipped, his focus locked on the feeds I was staring at. "A setup, not the Calibers. Someone else used their name." Another guard's voice crackled over the comms. "We've lost the convoy." My stomach dropped. Lost them? That meant someone was making a move, and she was the pawn. Marco finally turned to her, and on the screen, I saw the worry etch deeper lines into his face. "Miss Santos, how did they get your number?" "I don't know. I've had it forever. It's not." Then she remembered. A call, 10 minutes ago. They knew her job, said she was a problem to be erased. Marco's face hardened. "Your phone, now." I watched her hand it over, her fingers trembling as he popped the battery out with an expert flick. "They were on you." Marco's voice was a low growl through the speaker. "Probably cloned it at the hospital, or maybe stole the data from the restaurant's files." He barked an order at another guard. "Sweep the whole estate. If they had her phone, they might have planted something else." The seconds ticked by like hours. I scanned the dozen different camera angles, my eyes burning. The gates, the gardens, the long, dark road. It all looked deceptively calm, but the control room was buzzing with a silent, deadly energy. We were all just waiting. And then, a flicker. A shadow detached itself from the trees on screen number 7. Then a second one. They moved like professionals, hugging the darkness, but Marco's system was too good. The infrared caught their heat signatures. "Breach on the south fence," I heard myself report, my voice thin. 4 unknowns, armed, moving toward the main house. I heard her ask about Mateo, her voice cracking with fear. Marco's calm reply about the safe room, the reinforced steel, was meant to soothe her, but it didn't soothe me. "They're not after him," Marco stated, his voice turning to ice. "They're coming for you." "How?" "Because we have a mole." As he said it, my screens went black. The red emergency lights flickered on, casting the room in a hellish glow. Shouts erupted through the comms. Distant gunfire. On the one camera that came back up, I saw Marco grab her, pulling her toward a hidden panel. "We're moving you," he ordered. "Stay with me. Stay quiet. If I say run, you run. Got it?" She just nodded, her face pale. The panel slid open, revealing a dark tunnel. An actual tunnel under the estate. I watched them run on the grainy camera feed, Marco in the lead, two guards at the rear, their steps echoing in my headset. More pops of gunfire from above, closer this time. I could almost smell the smoke through the vents. "How long till Dante's here?" I heard her gasp. 10 minutes, Marco shot back. Less if he's driving like the maniac he is. He pulled her around a corner, out of my sight, toward what I knew was the secondary exit. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. Suddenly, my audio feed exploded with noise. An explosion. The door to the underground garage. Concrete and metal shrieking. Through the static, I could make out three shapes stepping through the dust, guns up. They had the cold, steady posture of men who did this for a living. Marco and his men opened up instantly. The roar was deafening even through my headset, a concussive blast in the enclosed space. I couldn't see anything, only hear the chaos. "Get in the car!" Marco's voice strained. I heard a grunt of pain, a car door being yanked open. Then a new voice cut through the gunfire, rough and unfamiliar. A hand grabbing her. I could picture it, the brutal grip. I saw it in my mind's eye, a man with no light in his eyes, a gun to her head. "Stop firing or she's dead," he shouted. The shooting stopped. I could hear Marco's heavy breathing over the open mic. His gun was up, I knew it, but it was useless. "Don't do this," Marco warned. "Moretti will tear you apart if you harm her." "Moretti's dead, or he will be," the man sneered. "She's just our ticket out of here. Didn't count on the new girl having a damn bodyguard, did we?" The pressure in my ears was immense. I heard the cold threat, "Drop the weapons or I'll redecorate with her." I had never heard Marco hesitate before, but I heard it then, a split second of indecision. He was weighing his orders against the reality of the gun to her head. Save her, no matter what. "Do it," I heard her say, her voice quiet but firm. "Marco, drop them." Then her voice broke, filled with a desperate plea. "I'm not dying for some stupid pride. Drop the guns." The sound of metal hitting concrete, one gun, then two more. The man holding her chuckled, a horrible, triumphant sound. "Smart girl. Now you're gonna walk with me. You try anything, I'll take out your knees and drag you. Understand?" I heard her give a choked confirmation, then the sound of footsteps dragging backward. I imagined Marco's eyes, the promise he couldn't keep. "We'll find you," was the last thing I heard Marco say before the signal cut out as they moved farther away. I was left with static and darkness. Outside, I knew a van would be waiting. I could picture her being thrown inside, treated like an object. The doors slamming, the engine roaring to life. Then, a new voice patched through the comms, one of the kidnappers, triumphant. "We got the girl, Moretti's little project. Tell the boss we're heading for the warehouse." A short silence. "Yeah, the one by the docks, where the meet was supposed to happen." A cold laugh followed. "Let's see what his son's hero is really worth." I sat there staring at the blank monitor, the weight of my uselessness pressing down. She was a debt, a weakness, a target. I saw her as leverage for them. But would he see her as something worth saving, or just another problem to be cleaned up? The van would be speeding through the city, every bump a fresh agony for her. I knew she wouldn't scream, wouldn't give them that. She was tougher than that. She'd face whatever came as the woman who shielded a child with her own body. That had to count for something in this mess, even if no one was left to remember her. The warehouse would reek of fish and diesel. I knew the place from surveillance files. A concrete tomb where deals were sealed in blood. They'd tie her to a chair, I was sure of it, and leave her there, waiting for the devil himself to come calling. Because Dante would come. There was never any doubt about that. The only question was what he'd do when he got there. I imagined one of them taunting her, a young punk with a cigarette and a scar. "You're quiet," he'd say. "Most people would be a mess." Would it do any good? She'd ask, her voice stronger than he'd expect. He'd probably laugh. No, but it'd be more fun. Sorry to disappoint. I could almost see the flicker of a smile on her face. He'd ask about the broken glass, if it was real. It wasn't a story, she'd say. It was instinct. I imagined her testing the ropes, the pain from her back flaring up, the feeling of her stitches tearing, of warm blood. He's 5 years old, she would say. He shouldn't pay for what his father does. The guard might even agree. None of us should, he'd mutter, but that's the world we're in. He'd probably tell her it was a bad idea, that Moretti doesn't make deals for people. He comes like a hurricane, and everyone in his path gets swept away. Then why are you here? She'd ask. Because I'm already a dead man. That's what we all were. He might even give her a piece of advice. If you get out of this, you tell Moretti everything, names, faces. It's the only thing that might keep you alive. And just as he finished, the doors would explode inward. Not a quiet entry. This would be a statement. A declaration of war. Dante Moretti would stride in, flanked by his men, a storm of fury contained in a human form. Even from my control room miles away, I could feel the chill of his arrival. His suit would be ruined, stained with blood, but he would move like a predator stalking his prey. His eyes would lock onto her instantly, and in that gaze there would be no softness, just a cold, hard claim. Mine, and you touched what is mine. The leader, Russo, would step out, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Moretti, so glad you could make it. But Dante's voice, relayed through the comms from his team's open mics, would be pure ice. You have 30 seconds to let her go. In that moment, staring at the static on my screen, I finally spoke, keying my mic to Marco's private channel. The south fence, I said, my voice shaking. There was a maintenance van that didn't log out. I think I found our mole. It began on the coldest day of the year, a day I'll never forget. I saw her tied to that chair and my gut twisted. Russo was all talk, a peacock puffing his chest out, but the boss, Dante, was like ice. His calm was the most terrifying thing in that warehouse. He gave them 20 seconds. My hand was already on my pistol, the cold steel a familiar weight. We were all just waiting, watching, and a part of me has hated myself for just watching ever since. I was another shadow in a room full of them, a silent accomplice to whatever came next. And I knew even then that it would be something awful. The air was thick with the promise of violence, a countdown to a life changing forever. I never even saw him draw. One moment, Dante was still. The next, a crack echoed through the space, and the kid with the scarred eyebrow was on the ground. A perfect stillness followed the chaos of the shot. The smell of gunpowder cut through the cold air. 10 seconds left. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. The boss hadn't looked away from Russo, not for a second. We all drew our weapons then, a symphony of clicking metal. I was trapped in the middle of it. Just another gun, another body. I saw her flinch, trying to make herself small, and the guilt was like a physical weight. We were supposed to be the good guys. Russo grabbed her, a coward using a woman as a shield. He didn't realize he'd just signed his own death warrant. The boss's face was stone, but his eyes were calculating everything. I could see the angles, the possibilities, playing out behind his gaze. For one horrifying second, I wondered if she was just an acceptable loss to him. But then I saw it, a flicker of something raw, something that went beyond strategy. He wasn't seeing a bargaining chip. He was seeing the woman who'd saved his son. The rest of us faded away. It was just the three of them, and we were witnesses to a verdict already decided. Hearing the boss lay out Russo's life like a roadmap to hell made my blood run cold. Sophia, the daughter in Milan, the mother in Naples. He knew everything. These weren't empty words. I'd seen him follow through on promises far less serious than this. We weren't just his men. We were believers in his terrible certainty. We moved as one with him, a living tide of loyalty that I knew would drown Russo if he didn't give in. This wasn't business anymore. It was personal. And I watched the tremor in Russo's hand, the one pressed to her temple, and I knew he finally understood the mistake he'd made. He thought the boss was like him, that everything had a price. He didn't get it. He didn't understand that for Dante Moretti, some debts are absolute. The words, "Stand down," from Russo were a gust of relief in the suffocating room. We all lowered our weapons, the tension finally breaking. And I watched the boss transform. The monster receded, and the man emerged. He knelt by her, his hands that could deliver death now working to bring comfort. His voice soft as he asked if she was okay. The contrast was jarring, a side of him few of us ever got to see. His voice was different when he spoke to her, quieter. I could see the change in him plain as day. She was his anchor in the storm he'd created. And then she refused to leave. She wanted to see. I couldn't believe her courage. She had every right to run from this world, from him, from us. Instead, she stood her ground, bloodied and bruised, and demanded the truth. In that moment, she was braver than any of us, because we just followed orders. She was choosing to understand, and I felt a deep, profound respect for her. The boss looked at her for a long time before he turned back to Russo. His judgment was swift, not with a bullet, but with something worse: erasure. He took Russo's entire life in the city with a few quiet sentences. It was a masterclass in power, a reminder that the greatest weapon isn't always a gun. It's the ability to unmake a man completely. I saw true fear on Russo's face then, not of dying, but of living with the consequences of having crossed Dante Moretti. It was a lesson I'd never forget. When they were gone, the silence was louder than the gunfire had been. I saw the exhaustion hit the boss, the weight of the decisions he'd made. He looked at her, and the hardness was gone, replaced by a deep-seated weariness. He told her she should have gone, and I silently agreed. No one should have to see the things we'd seen tonight, especially not her. This world chews people up and spits them out, and she seemed too good for it, too bright for all this darkness. I watched him catch her when she swayed, his movements so careful. I couldn't hear his words, but I could see the meaning in his posture. He was explaining, justifying, offering a glimpse into the reasons behind his violence. He was showing her the man behind the monster. And she was listening, leaning into him, not just for support, but for something more. She was seeing the man who would burn the world down for those he chose to protect, and she wasn't running away. I didn't understand why then. He offered her a clean slate, a new life, a way out. It was a genuine offer. I could see it on his face. He would have let her walk away, no strings attached, but she asked to stay. I heard her say she finally felt like she mattered, and it hit me hard because I understood that feeling. In this world, you are never invisible. You are seen. You matter. Her choice wasn't about fear. It was about finally finding a place where she wasn't just a ghost passing through. He wanted her. It was plain to see, a raw hope on his face that I'd never witnessed before. As he chose her, and she chose him, I felt a flicker of hope for them both. It was as they turned to leave that I saw it, a flash of metal from behind a stack of shipping containers. One of Russo's men, left behind and looking for revenge. For a split second, I was frozen, the silent witness I'd always been. Then her face flashed in my mind. I didn't think. I lunged forward, shoving them both aside as I yelled, "Down!" My own gun was in my hand, and my shot was the one that broke the silence. The ringing in my ears was the sound of my own fear, finally conquered. "You're mine, Elena Santos." I could almost hear him say it, the words wrapping around her like chains. I imagined him kissing her, not with love, but with the finality of ownership. And the worst part was, I could see why she'd let him. To be seen, to be protected, to matter. It was a powerful temptation. But home? That wasn't a home. It was a fortress. And as I dialed the number, my heart hammering, I prayed she remembered that. I wasn't just doing it for her anymore. I was doing it for me, for the person I wanted to be. The person who doesn't just stand by and watch, 3 months. It had been 3 months of haunting silence. As I listened to the phone ring, I looked out at the city lights, a world full of invisible people just like I had been. The scars on her back might fade, but I hoped the memory of who she was wouldn't. I gave the dispatcher his name, her name, and the address of the restaurant where she was last seen. I didn't give my own. It was a coward's courage, but it was all I had. Some cages are chosen, I thought, but someone should still check the lock. That single anonymous call was my penance, my hope. It was the price I finally paid for my silence, a debt written in regret, and the fierce, desperate protection of a friend. I still remember the first day I saw her, a shadow trying to melt into the siding of her own house. The sound of a slammed door would make her jump. I'd see the boy, Mateo, playing alone in the yard, and I'd just turn away, telling myself it wasn't my business. Tonight, I hear a new sound through my window, the boy's happy shrieks, not of fear, but of pure joy. I see her silhouette in their kitchen, and the big man, Dante, puts his arms around her with a gentleness that seems to defy his size. I can't hear their words, but I see the way she leans into him, the tension gone from her shoulders. I see a woman who isn't hiding anymore, but is finally home. He's the one who saw her when all I did was look away, and that thought sits heavy in my gut. I watch him kiss her, a quiet promise under the porch light as the first snowflakes begin to fall. That house used to feel cold, but now it glows with a warmth that has nothing to do with the furnace. They built that life from the ashes of her old one, something fierce and unbreakable. I heard the stories about the fire, about her running across shattered glass to get to that boy. She walked through hell and found a reason to live. My own story was one of cowardice, but watching them, a little bit of her courage must have drifted across the lawn. I pick up the phone and dial the number I should have called a year ago, finally giving the authorities the license plate number I scribbled down in secret. A small act, spoken into the darkness, hoping to protect their light. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.